What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, the 1st of May, 2019. It's May Day, International Workers' Day, which actually began right here in the United States. It's celebrated all over the world, except for right here in the United States for some reason. So it is May Day, and May Day celebrations are taking place in a lot of different places. Right now, the corporate media is being dominated by the Barr hearing before Congress, and they're giving them a real grilling, and they're not getting anywhere with it. Venezuela is almost off the news. I mean, Fox News is running a story that there are new clashes in Venezuela, but as of right now, it looks like the attempted coup d'etat has fizzled. So we'll get into that in just a little bit. Meanwhile, the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. That's 800-313-9443. And Sam is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments, questions, and opinions here. Also, looks like they had a real bad day on the Dow. All right, let's get on into it because, again, there's a lot going on here, and the focus, at least here, is going to be on Venezuela. Maduro's congratulating his military for defeating the coup attempts as Guaido calls for more protests. So he's still trying to keep that going. But remember, the first indicator that the coup had gone off the rails was when some of his key supporters and backers started showing up at embassies of other countries and asking for asylum, which they were given. But Guaido is still out there calling for an uprising. And again, it looks like far more people are in the streets supporting him than opposing him. And let's see, article coming out of South Front saying that the U.S. hybrid war on Venezuela has entered a hot phase. Yeah, that does seem to be it. So you've got Guaido was on a video yesterday, self-declared interim president of the country, calling for a military uprising. Guaido was flanked by heavily armed men, claiming that he had backing from the military and that the video was filmed at the Generalissimo Francisco de Miranda Air Base in the capital, Caracas. That turned out to be a little bit less than accurate. He wasn't able to get into the air base, so they just found another location. Now, opposition politician Leopoldo Lopez, who'd been held under house arrest for inciting violence, appeared along Guaido, and he claimed that he had been released by the military. Then later in the day, he showed up at the embassy in Chile with his family and asked for asylum. So the U.S. immediately declared its public support for the coup attempt at the highest level and once again threatened the country's legitimate government with military action. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo called the actions of Guaido and his armed supporters a quest for freedom and democracy. In other words, the usual bovine excrement we get shoveled at us every time the U.S. overthrows somebody else's legitimate government. Eric Prince is still running around Washington, D.C., pitching a plan to privatize the coup against Venezuela using his latest Blackwater-inspired mercenary empire. He's saying with about 5,000 people that he could definitely topple Nicolas Maduro. Okay, we got callers coming in on the phones lines now. Let's start with Sovereign Man in Freedom Land. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Greetings, Mike. Also, let me say this. Mayday, Mayday, happy birthday, Illuminati. You got one of those Federal Reserve notes?
Somewhere around here.
Yeah, if you pull that out and flip it over, you know those two symbols on the back? At the bottom of the pyramid, it has the Roman numerals for 1776.
Yes.
And the Illuminati, those are symbols for the Illuminati, a.k.a. the corporation. And it was established May 1st, 1776. Just a few months before the so-called Declaration of Independence.
Okay, well, I was unaware of that part of it. I'm not seeing the Roman numerals, though. What I'm seeing underneath the pyramid is Novus Ordo Seclorum.
Oh, no, it's at the bottom of the pyramid. It has MC.
Oh, it's on the bottom of the pyramid. I see it now. Yep.
Yeah, those are the Roman numerals for 1776.
Okay, well, good little thing to know.
Yeah, there's a guy, his name is Doc Marquis. He's a former, well, I would say he's like a sixth generation Illuminist, but he's former Illuminist. And I think the video is called the Eye of the Phoenix. And he talks about, the symbols on the back of the dollar bill and how all that came about. And pretty interesting video.
Yeah, well, a lot of symbolism back then. Of course, many of the founding fathers were Freemasons and deists, so they would try to put symbols in there that would appeal to pretty much everybody in the newly created country. Anything else?
Well, it's not just back then. It's still today. It's all around us.
Well, except for the emojis on our cell phones, most ordinary people just don't pay as much attention to symbols today as they did back then. Mostly because symbols existed at a time when literacy wasn't that high.
Right, and if you weren't that literate, but you knew the secret handshake, you could get a job.
Yep. Okay.
Blessings, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go and switch over to Jim in Illinois. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Michael, how you doing?
I'm doing okay.
Okay, I am not a Democrat. I am not a Republican, and this is why I'm stating that. I have read the Mueller report. I watched the entire hearing today, and after watching the hearings and also after reading the Mueller report, Attorney General Barr is not the Attorney General for the United States. He is the Attorney General and lawyer for Donald Trump, and he's protecting him. And that is so obvious. I mean, he was able to say certain things, but basically he was tap dancing, not really telling the truth and making excuses, which tells me something went on in the White House. Something continues to go on. Donald Trump should be impeached. Obviously, people in his campaign are acting like a crime syndicate. Even the White House attorney who resigned.
Well, I mean, the entire government is operating like a crime syndicate these days. It's hardly unique to the White House.
Well, I agree with that.
I watched a little bit of the hearings. I wasn't able to watch them all because I was doing show prep. And we're going to be talking about the hearings here in a little bit after we get through the international news. The sense I got was that Barr was feeling very defensive because he was under verbal attack from all these lawyers who wanted to grill him. And he knew going on in it was going to be a grilling. But apparently Robert Mueller is saying that Barr's summary of the Mueller report was accurate, that in point of fact it was the corporate media's reporting on the report that was inaccurate and giving a false impression. So we're going to have to be really very careful. And inasmuch as the unredacted report has not been made public, none of us, not you, not I, has actually read it yet.
Well, it's going to be interesting when Mueller comes to Capitol Hill and testifies. This is what I believe, and I am a historian when it comes to the Watergate hearings. Watergate started off slow, but by the time it was over, Nixon had no choice to resign. I'm not saying Trump is going to resign, but the truth is going to come out when the American public see it in black and white what's going on Capitol Hill.
Well, you seem to be coming into this discussion with a great deal of prejudice. You're guessing that you know something was going on without actually having the evidence.
Michael, wait a second. I'm not being taking sides. I'm just saying the evidence coming out. That's what I'm saying. Did you read the Mueller report?
I read part of it, and basically it said, well, I've read Barr's summary of it, and said...
Okay. I read the entire thing, all 480-some pages. I read the entire thing. And after reading that, it tells you the reason Donald Trump was not indicted because he's a sitting president. If he was a citizen, he would be in jail right now. And again, I'm not a Democrat or Republican. I can criticize the Democrats just like I'm criticizing Republicans and Donald Trump. My concern is the country. We're so divided, and nobody really wants to tell the truth.
Well, over the weekend, I'm going to get around to reading the Mueller report, or at least as much of it as is out there. But I don't want to jump to any conclusions here, specifically because what I'm hearing from the Democratic side is we don't care what Mueller says. We don't care what Barr says. We know there's got to be something there. We know we've got to impeach. And, you know, I don't want to get everybody rushing headlong in that direction before we know for a fact what is going on. And we know that Mueller was, you know, very hostile towards Donald Trump. I don't know about Attorney General Barr, but I don't see Mueller covering up for Trump. I think Mueller, if Mueller had actually found something, he would have come out with it. But we're now hearing that it was known inside circles going all the way back to August of last year that Mueller couldn't find anything.
I would agree with that. But again, let's agree with this. Let's just wait and see what happens. Also, I also agree they should have gone after Hillary Clinton.
I agree with that one, certainly. I mean, there is so much more there with Hillary Clinton. There's Uranium One, there's the Clinton Foundation, and it is astounding how the Clintons can just keep getting away with what they're getting away with, and nobody will touch them. Anyway, Jim, we're going to let you go. Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. Getting on back to Venezuela. Now, this is speculative, okay? But 2 aircraft carriers have left the port. The USS Eisenhower and her escorts have left Virginia and were last seen sailing south. The USS Roosevelt and her escorts have departed San Diego and were also seen heading south, presumably toward the Panama Canal. And the speculation is that these 2 carrier groups are heading for the coast of Venezuela. Now, the U.S. government is already out there screaming, pointing fingers. These people are to blame for our coup d'etat not working out. You're not letting us have our fun. And apparently, Trump yesterday was threatening to tighten the already tight embargo around Cuba if Cuba does not remove its military people from Venezuela. And Carlos Fernandez de Ocasio, Cuba's Director General of U.S. Affairs, said the U.S. is falsely accusing Cuba of having more than 20,000 troops and intelligence agents in Venezuela. De Ocasio said there are roughly 20,000 Cubans in Venezuela, but virtually all are medical workers, and they are some of the finest medical workers in the world. De Ocasio said there are no troops. Cuba does not participate in military operations nor in security operations in Venezuela. Meanwhile, John Bolton basically stated that Trump is returning to the Monroe Doctrine and will be exerting its influence to stabilize Venezuela, basically demanding all foreign influence, including Russia, remove themselves from this hemisphere. And as a little reminder, the Monroe Doctrine goes back to 1823, before the Civil War. But that's basically, you know, we have simply declared this is our hemisphere. Oh, well, what are you doing in the other hemisphere? You're all over the Persian Gulf. Okay. Needless to say, studies by media observers are showing that the corporate media is totally on board. Totally on board. Yes, let's change the regime. Let's get that evil Maduro. He must be made to go. And meanwhile, Lavrov to Pompeo is saying that U.S. interference in Venezuela's affairs is a breach of international law, which is certainly true with that. But again, we don't care about international law. We have the Monroe Doctrine that says we can muck about in this hemisphere as much as we want. Supporters of Venezuelan President Maduro are participating in the annual International Workers' Day March in Caracas. People loyal to the opposition of Juan Guaido have joined a rally. Guaido had called for the largest protest in Venezuela's history, didn't quite get it. But Maduro, who's got the support of China and Russia, among others, is accusing Guaido of plotting to overthrow him with the help of Washington, D.C., which everybody's kind of figured it out already. Over at the Ron Paul Institute, Daniel McAdams has weighed on in, saying that Guaido's coup is a farce. It's an absolute farce. Meanwhile, police in Washington, D.C. have set up barricades between the pro-Maduro activists who are inside Venezuela's embassy and the more recent arrivals who are protesting in favor of Guaido. Ron Paul is now warning that Guaido may now be worth more dead than alive to Washington's coup creators. He's failed to kickstart the military uprising yesterday. It was a major fizzle. And Russia Today is reporting that his life may be in danger from his own CIA backers. The big danger is a hard war breaking out, a wide-ranging war, thousands of troops involved and dragging on for years, another Vietnam. Okay, let's see. We're going to take another phone call. Joe in Oklahoma. Aloha, Joe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Two things, Michael, quickly. You spoke about Trump and the Monroe Doctrine.
Yes.
Running everybody out of Venezuela. Well, you know, if he's going to go that far, why don't he start, before he gets down to Venezuela, why doesn't he start at Panama and run the Chinese out of there?
Yeah, that would be a good idea.
I mean, you know, why don't we take the things closest to us first? And then the second thing I'd like to comment on, and I haven't heard it said, but it maybe has been, that where people are getting swept up on this immigration deal, Pelosi and Schumer both give it away when they do not want the illegal immigrants in their cities. And they are trying to move everyone to the central United States where Trump did win.
Yes.
Where the Republican base is strong. And I'm not in support of them either. But what I'm saying is that is how they will defeat the Electoral College.
Oh, there's absolutely no question about that. We saw that in the midterms where the illegals were being flooded into California, which when I was growing up was traditionally a Republican stronghold. And sure, they're basically funneling these illegal immigrants into these just slightly red districts in order to flip them just slightly blue. And a whole bunch of districts in California, Southern California especially, that's exactly what happened. And that's why California lost so many of their incumbent representatives in favor of some new Democratic first-termers. And that's exactly what they're doing. The Democrats want the illegal immigrant voters to be basically poured into conservative areas.
We can see that in our recent elections at the city levels in Tulsa and Oklahoma City. Republicans are not strong there anymore. Throughout the state of Oklahoma, Republicans are strong, but when you get to the metropolitan areas, they are waning fast. And the Republican leadership has dropped the ball. At the state level, Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan are just as treasonous, in my opinion, as anybody that's held office in our federal government. They have sold us down the tubes. Thank you, and good day.
All right, thank you. And we've got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go right back to the phones here to Al in New Jersey. Aloha, Al. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, yes, thank you. This is regarding the previous caller. No, I just wonder, what is it with Americans wanting to sick the U.S. on other countries? You know, when the U.S. starts attacking Panama, they're going to attack innocent people, and the Panamanians have been the most loyal of all the allies of the U.S., and they're the ones that are going to be suffering. So please don't continue with that attitude.
Well, I think you need to understand something. First of all, ordinary Americans do not support what the U.S.'s government is doing in any of these countries around there. My comment about maybe being a good idea to recapture control of the canal from China has to do with the fact of the U.S. government's current belligerence toward China, and the fact that China could, in fact, start blocking U.S. shipping from using the canal, which that would definitely lead to a military confrontation.
It's all interwoven, and the U.S. is very hypocritical because they're sanctioning China, and at the same time they're importing goods from China. So which is it?
Well, again, this is the U.S. government. It's not the American people. And a lot of us are feeling very frustrated and helpless. We can't regain control of this country. The government is making what I consider to be very, very poor choices.
Yeah.
Pardon me.
Well, I just want for people to know that if there's any bombs going to be dropped, the ones that are going to get the short end of the stick are the common people there.
It's always that way. It's always that way, whether it's Iraq or Syria or Afghanistan or Libya. Ordinary people, civilians are being killed. Up in Afghanistan, the U.S. is killing more civilians than the Taliban is.
Yeah. And, regarding Venezuela, we're looking at this situation down in South America, and we're very much afraid that the U.S. is going to start bombing and dropping Agent Orange now in South America.
Yeah. That would be a bad thing.
Terrible.
That would be a very...
It would be our turn, right?
Well, there was a period, I think it was back in post-World War II, maybe. I'm going to have to go back and look at the history, where the U.S. government just started going around South America messing with all the countries. I mean, they overthrew Allende in 1973. They put in the dictator Pinochet, and that's where that whole image of the ugly American comes from.
And Nicaragua.
Yeah, in Nicaragua, and we may be seeing a revival of that whole mindset.
God help us.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome.
Care.
And we're going to switch over to Joe in Tennessee. Aloha, Joe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, first time I was in Venezuela was right around the Panamanian invasion, and they were having riots there then in Caracas, and they've been having riots for 30 years at least. I mean, you got to look at it's a very unstable country considering all the oil wealth it has, and maybe that's part of why it's unstable.
That's definitely why it's unstable. The U.S. has been trying to get control of that, going all the way back to Hugo Chavez.
I call this guy I call him Guano. This guy they're trying to put it, because that's batshit, you know, and he's batshit crazy. And I look at the guy, he gives me the creeps. Not that Maduro's any better. I mean, it goes back to Hugo Chavez. You know, I mean, he was tortured when he was a political, a newcomer. You know, the rich oligarchs that controlled Venezuela, they took him and they tortured him because he was like a peasant leader, you know, in a peasant revolution, the tribal people. And, he came in, and, of course, when you've been tortured and imprisoned and your people have been abused, a lot of times you become very revolutionary. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of not. People don't realize that what the animosity of the peasant class to the ruling class in Venezuela, it goes very deep. Those people were really abused, and it's really a very horrible situation. I hope there's a solution. And I hope that Trump, he's playing some kind of game, but he's not going to go to like any kind of real militantism, because that would be a nightmare.
Yeah, unfortunately, you've got Bolton and Pompeo on either side of him who are saying, "Yeah, go get him, go get him. We're gonna bomb the heck out of him." And Trump is showing himself once again to be a very, very weak leader. He's just too easy to manipulate by the people around him. And so at this point, I would say that, yeah, I think it's a good bet that the carrier groups Eisenhower and Roosevelt are going to be off the coast of Venezuela probably by the first part of next week. And we'll start seeing the bombs fall.
Stick.
All right, Joe, thanks an awful lot. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we're going to go back to the phones here to Murr in Wisconsin. Aloha, Murr. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. I just watched this. It's from 2009, Oliver Stone's documentary, South of the Border, about Chavez.
Yes.
And it was amazing what he did. You know, took control of the oil. The economy doubled in 6 years.
Yes.
And there were 70% less poor in less time than that. So it's very, I hadn't watched it, and I was sort of like, you know. But I was talking to Patrick Slattery, and I thought, well, wait a minute, I haven't even watched this yet before I down-talk it, right?
Yes.
So it's very good. I don't know if you've seen it. You might want to put it up on your site.
I'm putting it up on the site right now.
It's very good. And like I put in the email, it's the media. You know.
Oh, no question about that.
The fake news. I can't wait for Trump to say fake money. What happens then?
Yeah.
All hell will break loose, I guess. But
I imagine so. That's not going to happen, though. Trump is rapidly morphing into just another establishment front guy. You know,
it seems that way due to the media. You have to remember, there's a lot going on behind the scenes. I mean, think about it. Bibi gave him gourds of wine. Now, how is that not an insult to someone who doesn't drink and his brother drank himself to death? I mean, there's so much subterfuge. And the things, like when he went to Warsaw, when they had the thing in Warsaw, Trump and all.
Yes.
He parked the GHW Bush warship, the largest warship in the world, off the coast of Israel. And just before that, he sent a listening ship, much like Liberty.
Mm-hmm.
But the only bit from Israel about that was, oh, yeah, you know, we're buddies, blah, blah, you know, basically. No. It was to prevent any false flags from going down in Warsaw or elsewhere. It worked.
Or it may have just been, you know, goading each other, subtle insults back and forth, little messages
well, we
here.
Have to remember,
but as far
this man has been planning.
As far as Trump himself is concerned, we do have a window into the Trump administration we have not had previously, and that, of course, is his Twitter feed. Now, on the assumption that Trump's Twitter feed is not being actually generated by some staffer somewhere, we can get a picture of what Trump is thinking through that. And we can see that there is a gap between what he seems to be thinking and what he actually does. And getting on back down to Venezuela, my concern, of course, is that there are a lot of war hawks. They've been lusting after Venezuela's oil for a very long time. It's the largest known reserves on Earth. And it's not like we need the oil itself, but we are desperate to control what currency that oil is traded for. And that's been an issue with Venezuela all along, even going back to Hugo Chavez. Hugo Chavez was willing to sell that oil for any currency the buyer wanted to use. And that, of course, just undermined the whole Bretton Woods hegemonic domination of the world's economy. And that's really what all these wars are about. It isn't that the United States needs the oil. The United States has got plenty of oil. What the United States is desperate for is to keep foreign demand for U.S. dollars up. And the only way it can do that is to shackle natural resources like oil to those dollars. And more countries are breaking away from that. And that's why this country is in serious trouble right now.
Yeah, in that documentary, I believe it skips over Colombia because they've always been a real tool for the U.S.
Oh, yes.
And continuing. And if you also look, Florida McKee, M-A-Q-U-I-S, has a YouTube channel, and a lot of his things get blocked often. But he's been covering this for a very long time. I was without interwebs since January till just recently. And, last year I was really, he was one of the only ones that was kind of really covering much about Venezuela and what's going on.
Yeah.
And it turned out satellite photos they would delete really quickly, at least for consumption of the public. I'm sure they're stashed somewhere else. But one of the satellites following soldiers, and this is all over the globe, is Strava, S-T-R-A-V-A, and they follow the Fitbits.
Yes.
So it's kind of fun to see the heat maps.
Yes.
You see them in Antarctica where they're working out. You see them on the ships where they're zigzagging back and forth. And, so you can kind of get an idea where things are. But like I said, then they delete it so we can't see it. So
yes.
But, yeah, watch that documentary, people, Mike's listeners.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. And, that whole thing about Fitbit, you didn't even need a satellite for that because Fitbit sends that information back, over the Wi-Fi cell phone systems. And so you had exact GPS coordinates on all these military personnel. That, of course, was giving away a lot of tactical information to a potential enemy. So I'm not surprised that they basically shut that down. Okay, getting on back to Venezuela and corporate media and the propaganda. Yesterday, late in the day, there was a claim that was put out saying that Maduro was ready to flee Venezuela, and he was talked out of it by Vladimir Putin. Moscow's come on out and say, no, it did not happen. It was just propaganda by the U.S. to try and demoralize Maduro's supporters by saying, he's bailing out. Stop fighting against Guaido. Maduro's, he's ready to go. He's only staying because Putin made him do that. And Moscow saying, no, it didn't happen. It's part of the information war. They were trying to demoralize the Venezuelan military. Apparently over at CNN, Jake Tapper has come under fire for claiming Venezuelan President Maduro is firing at his own citizens. And apparently he used a misleading tweet showing army defectors on the opposition side wielding guns. And here's where it gets really, really weird. This is coming out of Republican Congressman Mario Diaz-Balart, who basically, on an interview with Fox News, came on out and said, Vladimir Putin has installed nuclear missiles in Venezuela. We're back to the Cuban Missile Crisis now. And Diaz-Balart told Fox News if Maduro stays in power, it could be an open door for the Russians and the Chinese and for others to increase their activity against our national security interest, meaning our unbridled greed, as it were. So Tucker Carlson said, are you suggesting they're going to invade? And Diaz-Balart said, the closest we ever came to nuclear war was because the Russians put missiles in Cuba. And Carlson said, are you saying the Russians will put nuclear missiles in Venezuela? And Diaz-Balart said, what I'm suggesting is that they are already there. Of course, he didn't have any evidence to back up his claim. It's just more of the fear-mongering. Now, before the fateful date of January 22nd, which is when Guaido got up there and said, I'm it, fewer than 1 in 5 Venezuelans had ever even heard of the guy. Only a few months ago, he was an obscure character in a politically marginal far-right group closely associated with gruesome acts of street violence. Even in his own party, Guaido had been a mid-level figure in the opposition-dominated National Assembly, which is now held under contempt, according to Venezuela's constitution. All it took was one phone call from U.S. Vice President Mike Pence, and Guaido was out there proclaiming himself as president of Venezuela. He's been anointed leader of his country by Washington, and this previously unknown political bottom dweller was vaulted into the international stage as the U.S. selected leader of the nation with the world's largest oil reserves. That's what this is all about. Controlling those reserves, controlling what currency they're sold for. Let's go back to the phones here. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
That's what it's about, Mike. Recycling those petrodollars. That's what I was asking Saudi Arabia. But that's like the whole thing with Iran also. It's all about the petrodollar. You know? That's all it's about. Propping up semi-dying system at this point.
Yep.
But Mike, that thing with did you know there was a couple of these small commanders in Venezuela that had their units go out, and the unit didn't even know what they were going out for, so they got set up to make it look like they were there to support Guaido, but they weren't, because I saw interviews with them.
Yeah.
On so yeah, it was all a big propaganda show. Like, Maduro was ready to get on his plane. Yeah, okay.
They did the same thing in Turkey when they tried the coup d'etat against Erdogan. They claimed he was already on a plane out over the Atlantic. He'd left the country. There were these military units that were sent on out, didn't know what they were going to be doing. It's the same script all over again.
Yeah, and the whole thing with Guaido saying, he was at the Air Force, but he wasn't in the base.
Nope.
And all those pictures, it's all smoke and mirrors to try to get, Guaido has no support.
Nope.
Leopoldo Lopez was like basically, I'd say, the brains. Guaido is like the totem pole, like on top of the totem pole in terms of just image. But
yep.
Leo Lopez is the, is a link, that's more important. That's why he was the first to flee.
He's bugged out already.
But Mike, like I said before, if Trump, I still don't think there's going to be no air attack. I would probably see maybe mercenary starting like some kind of a proxy war there, because if Trump does this, he ain't going to get reelected. Like it's over.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to vote for him now anyway. Because of all this crap going on.
The only way I would ever vote for Trump in 2020 is if Hillary was the Democratic candidate.
But on that caller, you had a couple callers ago, he goes, Trump. Well, I want to ask this, like, if Trump got, say, impeached over some crap, it would lead to Pence. If Pence disappears, you would have Nancy. But what would change, people? The system is still the system. It doesn't matter who is in.
Yes.
It's the system that's the problem. Is Trump corrupt? I don't know. I don't know the guy. Is your system corrupt? Hell yes. And the Mueller report and all that. Who wrote it? You got to go like, who wrote this? Who wrote them? All the intelligence agencies, the CIA, the NSA, the DIA, the FBI, the State Department, Justice Department, it's all corrupt. Loretta Lynch, Comey, this or that, on and on. So they can write any report they want and fill it with crap. It doesn't mean it's true or not true. You know what I mean? They can make up anything they want.
True.
Anything. So like I said, what's changed? Like, the system is still there. Presidents come and go. This rotted system remains. And it's just, I know you get depressed. I get depressed because I'm like, how the hell do you, like you said, I know we got to wait till like it just disappears, because eventually it's just going to eat itself up.
Yes.
Like this show with Bard today, which was a show.
Yes.
By the way, what's the woman in Hawaii?
Tulsi. Macy Hirono. Macy Hirono.
Yeah. Did you see that with Barr? She's like calling Trump a grifter and a liar in the Oval Office. That's what she said. That's all a political show.
Yes.
Like a bread and circuses type of thing. But, Mike, that's all I want to say.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. And getting on back to the war zones, over in Iraq, the United States has finally actually carried out a military operation using an F-35. So this F-35A has carried out a pair of airstrikes against targets inside northern Iraq. They're saying the strikes were against ISIS, claiming to have hit a tunnel network and a weapons cache. This is the first time the F-35A has been used in combat, and apparently they kept it well out of the way of any possible countermeasures, because if one of those things gets shot down, it will be, shall we say, embarrassing. But the jets deployed into the region on April 15th, and officials are anticipating the first use of them. Now, the F-35 program has been wildly expensive, and the Pentagon is eager to start putting them into the field where it can sort of justify what they're doing and stop being an overpriced prototype and start being an overpriced weapon. So they finally got to use one. We'll see what happens with that here. Up in Idlib in Syria, a Saudi national that served as military commander of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham was reportedly assassinated in the Idlib province. According to pro-opposition activist Abu Yusuf al-Jazrawi, was assassinated this week. Unknown assailants opened fire on the commander inside the Idlib governorate town of Ma'arata. Now, Jazrawi was considered a security advisor to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham's leader, Abu Muhammad al-Jalani, before he was killed. Russian and Syrian air forces have launched the largest attack of the year as what they hope to be the final Idlib offensive nears. And so they're up there in northwestern Syria, and they targeted dozens of towns and villages along the Hama-Idlib axis with a high concentration of strikes on the rebel stronghold of Kafir Nabuda. So they're really pouring it on. Here's an interesting story, and it sort of basically gives away what's going on. A senior Pentagon official has admitted U.S. forces will be in Syria for, quote, the long haul, end quote, and coupled his statement by declaring the territory contains a lot of the oil resources and arable land. Now, this is an uncharacteristically frank remark, and they were made this week by Michael Mulroy, who's the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East, while addressing a conference at the D.C.-based Center for the New American Security, months after President Trump appeared to have caved into his advisors, reversing course earlier this year from his stated goal of a full and rapid U.S. troop exit from Syria. And that is the problem with Donald Trump. He's weak. He's easy to manipulate. He's susceptible to flattery. And these advisors, the same advisors who've gotten us into all these other horrible wars, they just work at him. They say, no, we have to stay in Syria. Oh, yes, we have to go into Venezuela. And Donald Trump says, well, I guess so. I guess so. I guess we have to do that. I think a strong president could do a lot to repair this government, like John F. Kennedy did. Of course, look what happened to him. We have to take a break for commercials, and we'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're coming from the top of the hour. We're talking about the war zones. Emphasis on the plural all around the world. Fox News is showing, again, new clashes in Venezuela. And again, like yesterday, there just doesn't seem to be that big of a crowd out there to support Guaido. So, unfortunately, I do think there's going to be a military action in Venezuela. I know that Dustin does not agree with me, but time will solve that mystery, as they say. Okay, getting on over to Afghanistan. There appears to be some progress being made toward a conclusion. And there are negotiations going on with the Taliban in Qatar that have achieved an uncommon consistency. There's a bipartisan resolution matching the Taliban's proposed timeline has emerged in the U.S. Senate. The main voices opposing peace originate from within the Pentagon and the Afghan National Unity Government. Now, in a departure from their constitutionally mandated subordinate role, top generals are calling for yet another extension on murky grounds. So it's a complex mess. How does the United States get out of Afghanistan without making it look like we lost, which we did? How does the U.S. puppet government in Afghanistan stay in power against the Taliban that it originally deposed? Okay, I'm watching the video feed from Caracas, and looks like the tear gas is already out. Down in Gaza, they have a problem with their water supply. We were talking the other day about California, how their tap water is carcinogenic, radioactive. And one of the reasons Gaza throughout history has been such a popular place is that it had lots of natural water. And every army leaving or entering the Sinai Desert would stop in Gaza and, you know, have a cool drink, fill up the canteens and skins. But today, the water of Gaza is a toxic situation. And it's because of the repeated Israeli attacks, the sealing of its border by Israel and Egypt, and it's left the territory unable to process its water or waste. Every drop of water swallowed in Gaza returns to the environment in a degraded state. It's just going back into the soil, whether coming right out of the toilets, coming right out of the hospitals, just right back into the soil. Over at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, there's a group of Jewish students asking a judge to order a panel discussion about Palestinian human rights off campus on the claim that it is anti-Semitic. Now, a judge heard the arguments, has not yet ruled. We'll take a break here for station identification. We'll be right back. And aloha America, welcome back to our show here. We're talking about events surrounding Israel, of which there are a great many. But here's an interesting little article. This came out of Electronic Intifada. And apparently in the wake of the recent elections, some of Israel's liberal backers are starting to fret that the self-described Jewish state is becoming ever less democratic. And that, of course, is going to be a bit of a problem because Israel likes to proclaim itself the only democracy in the Middle East. And on that platform, of course, does quite a bit of fundraising here in the United States. But the general line in Israel and among its Western supporters is that the country is able to balance its two important ideals and core principles, namely that it is a Jewish and presumably a universally democratic state. And it's shifted lately that this balance was offset by the recent right-wing tilt in the country. And that rightward shift is what has enabled Israel's passage of its apartheid-like nation-state law. It's not apartheid-like, it's apartheid. And the abandonment of its universal democratic identity in favor of an exclusivist Jewish one. Now, earlier in the week, there was a bit of a stink over a cartoon that appeared in the New York Times, which was immediately taken down from the website, and the New York Times davened and groveled and apologized for the anti-Semitism, but that's not the end of it. Israel's ambassador to the United Nations, Danny Danon, is out there demanding the United Nations criminalize anti-Semitism. And Danon said the time for talking and having a conversation is over. What Israel and the Jewish community around the world demand is action now. And he said basically those who engage in anti-Semitism must be punished, whether it is here at the UN or by political leaders, editors, policy pundits, or college professors. It does not matter. Anti-Semitism should have no place in our society. And again, they're trying to rebuild that shield behind which Israel hides. Because what Israel is trying to claim is anti-Semitism is criticism of the government of Israel and its actions. And that political cartoon from the New York Times was exactly that. It didn't bash Jewish people. It didn't attack their faith. It was basically a cartoon involving Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump and the relationship between them. And that's a legitimate area of discussion. But Israel's trying to claim, oh, no, anything that makes Israel look bad, that's anti-Semitic. And it's a ridiculous approach to take to anything, but Israel's gotten away with it for a very, very long time. But it makes about as much sense as claiming that you shouldn't criticize the Nazis because you're just showing your hatred of the German people. That's how absurd this whole idea is. But I can understand why Danny Dannon is in a bit of a panic here. Over at scottthornton.org, there's an article showing that polls taken among the American people continue to show that support for Israel is sliding. Support for Palestine, Gallup last month, their poll showed support for Palestine among Americans is now higher than support for Israel. That's a stunner. That's an absolute stunner, and that's why Israel is in a panic. All right, let's take a phone call now. Peter in California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, I think they should make a law that says that Jewish supremacism is illegal. We should make it illegal. We should make dual loyalty illegal.
I agree with you on that last one.
We should make fifth column, subversion of the government, illegal.
I think it already is.
Well, but that's what they're doing. It's the fifth column, Mike.
Yes.
And we should make the people who enable it, because the only reason why we can't stop it is because anybody who goes to stop it is immediately labeled anti-Semitic, and so they have to do it themselves, and they never do. They never do. It's a bunch of enablers, and the rest are fifth column.
Yep.
And so we should make all that illegal. And if they don't want to agree to it, then you know what? Go to the Holy Land. God gave you your real estate license. Go back over there, take that, and get the hell out.
Yep. I would agree with you on that one. Now here's the issue. Everybody thinks they're supreme. Okay, that's unfortunately part of our xenophobia and part of the whole racism issue. And so I don't think you can really say that can be made illegal. But I agree on the dual national situation. I think we also ought to look at going back to a time when we had laws that limited how much media a single entity could own, because a big part of the problem right now is that you have these large corporate empires which are dominated by you-know-who, and that is why, first of all, I'm amazed the New York Times actually put that cartoon up to begin with, but then it makes it very understandable why it would be yanked down very, very quickly.
There was another article about the New York Times just last week, and how they always say, well, it will lead to, they're talking about Israel, if these policies continue, it will lead to apartheid. They've been in apartheid for 70 years. It is apartheid, founded by ethnic cleansing Jewish supremacist terrorists who blew up car bombs, and 3 of the prime ministers were literally terrorists that pulled the trigger themselves.
Yes.
Nobody else has a country that's like that anywhere. And but the New York Times keeps saying, well, if they continue on this road, they're going to become apartheid. Give me a break, New York Times. That's why nobody reads your ass anymore. It's a lie, just like the Gallup numbers were a lie, and they admitted it.
Yes.
They admitted that they fudged the numbers for years, and it's all a lie. All the stuff that you see on TV.
Yep.
That doesn't give any context at all. It's lies by omission. And they own it all. They own the banks that own them as well.
Yes.
And it's toxic, and you can see why so many people have been so many countries have thrown them out and found them to be subversive, absolutely subversive.
Yes.
How are you going to do that? They're behind, everything from the open borders to the gun control stuff to, they support all that, almost as a block. All the wars, anything for Israel, please, it just drives me nuts to hear it, and I'm glad that you're running this stuff, Mike. So,
well, the sad truth is that if Israel's representatives in this country have their way, we ordinary American people are soon going to be living the standard of living of the Palestinians.
I'll tell you what's patently clear. They've had their own country now for 75 years or so. And it's patently clear that they cannot subjugate their own chosenness, ego, and racial Aryan supremacy and drive for Lebensraum. Does it remind you of anybody?
Yes, it does.
They can't, and they're patently incapable of governing other people, and they're patently incapable of living under anybody else's aegis without trying to take control. They're incapable of doing that. They will organize somehow and subvert everything. And I'm sorry, but that's just the nature of the culture. You can call it a trope all you want, but that's all the evidence is there. It's been around for thousands of years.
Well, it's written into their religion. If you read the Talmud, I mean, or even the Old Testament, it's we're the best, we're the greatest, we will smite the wicked, and God will wipe out the enemy because He's promised us all the goodies.
I heard a great Polish proverb that I read just the other day, and it said, "The Jew will cry out in pain as he beats you."
Yes, I've heard that one.
So, but the victims always, no matter what they're doing, they're always a victim.
Yep.
And by the way, they tried to blame everything on Gaza the other day. Did you see that?
Yes.
That it's all Gaza's fault, not theirs, but it's the poor people they're shooting down by the hundreds a week. It's amazing. Anyways, Mike, I know you got other calls and other topics, but thank you for taking the call.
All right, thanks an awful lot for the call. We're going to let you go here. And here we are. Okay. Today was the day that Iran was supposed to stop selling its oil, stop exporting its oil. And Trump ended the waivers, said there will be no wind down period. Everybody has to stop. Well, apparently, Iran is actually boosting gas sales to its neighbors, such as Iraq and Turkey, which have decided they don't want to go along with U.S. sanctions anymore. So what's the U.S. going to do to Iraq and Turkey? Well, sanction them. We're just going to sanction the heck out of those people here. Over in the South China Sea, and again, why are they doing this at a time when supposedly they're trying to get the trade agreement passed? But apparently the U.S. government has declared that what are described as paramilitary fishing boats will be treated like combatants. The U.S. has warned Beijing the U.S. military will aggressively respond to provocative acts by China's Coast Guard and fishing boats in the same way it reacts to the Chinese Navy. So, in other words, fishing boats that are outside China's territorial waters, they're now targets. Now, earlier this week, Chinese media confirmed that Russian warships arrived in Qingdao, a port city in East China's Shandong province, at the start of this week's joint China-Russia naval exercises. The Russian fleet included the Varyag guided missile cruiser, a submarine, 2 anti-submarine ships, a corvette, a landing ship, a tanker, and a rescue vessel. Early this week, Chinese media confirmed that Russian warships... Oops. Sorry, this was double printed. So they're going to have an exercise. They're going to learn how to work with each other, learn to get the translators going back and forth. Everybody's putting their weapons out there in play. Story coming on out from Sputnik News. One of the more closely guarded secrets we have in this country is just how many bombs does the United States have. Earlier, the Department of Energy formally rejected a request for information on the size of the U.S. nuclear weapons stockpile. by the Federation of American Scientists, breaking with nearly a decade of practice. Now, the Federation of American Scientists are the group that have that little doomsday clock on the front cover of their little bulletin here. But it is currently estimated the United States has close to 3,800 nuclear warheads. 1,300 of them are deployed on ballistic missiles. 300 warheads are located at strategic bomber bases across the U.S. We have a few of them here on this rock. Another 150 are tactical nukes at bases across Europe, and 2,050 more in reserve. So, apparently the U.S. also has approximately 2,300 warheads that are retired and slated to be dismantled. So, if the retired warheads are included, the total U.S. nuclear arsenal amounts to approximately 6,185 warheads stored across 24 locations in 11 U.S. states, as well as 5 European countries. That's a lot of bomb. That is a lot of bombs. Okay, getting on back to William Barr's testimony. Barr told Congress he had spoken to Mueller, and the special counsel said press reporting on the letter that the special counsel had written to Barr complaining about certain aspects of Barr's summary was inaccurate. Barr says that Mueller didn't say the Department of Justice misrepresented his report, and Barr added he was surprised when Mueller didn't rule on obstruction, though he also said that Comey's firing didn't amount to obstruction of justice. Comey was incompetent. Now, when Dianne Feinstein was questioning him, she focused on what Trump told former White House counsel Donald McCann II. Barr held his own, arguing it would be impossible to prove the president ever actually directed the firing of Mueller. It would also be difficult to show corrupt intent beyond a reasonable doubt. So again, the Democrats are on a fishing expedition. They just want something that they can hang impeachment on here. Okay, we already talked about that one. Let's go here. Story coming on out from amgreatness.com, and it says, forget about what's going on with the Mueller report here. The real bombshells are about to hit their targets, and what they're talking about is in the next few weeks, Inspector General Michael Horowitz is expected to issue his summation of the potential abuse of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act by top officials in the Obama administration and holdovers in the early Trump administration who were overseeing the investigation of Donald Trump's presidential campaign. And apparently the perpetrators from FISAgate are now scrambling for cover, because they know they may be in trouble. They better start making deals here. So we're here at the 1st of May, 2019. We've got an election coming up in November of 2020. The campaigns are already in full swing. The game playing is already out there. And what are the Democrats actually running on? What is their 2020 platform? It seems to just be reparations, allowing terrorists in jail to vote, and spending trillions of dollars to basically get rid of the plant food in the atmosphere. That's it. That's all they've got to work with. And that's why they're desperate to load up the red districts with illegal immigrant voters to turn them into blue districts. Because they don't really have anything to appeal to American voters with. Next year's election is going to set records for being crooked. Okay, let's talk about the economic news now. And apparently Italy is the latest country that wants to bring the people's gold home. European Central Bank's President Mario Draghi recently announced the ECB would be required to approve any management of gold reserves within the Eurozone countries. In other words, they're getting very nervous about countries saying, we want our gold back from the central bank. And so Draghi is saying, no, you have to have our permission. It may be your gold, but it's our central bank. And Draghi singled out Italy. And according to the Wall Street Journal, Italian citizens want to take control of Italy's gold reserves. During the last few years, a multitude of small investors lost billions of dollars due to the failure of several Italian banks. The Bank of Italy has been seen as an elitist, inefficient entity, indifferent to the needs of ordinary people. Deputy Prime Minister Luigi Di Maio is leading the attack against Italy's central bank, along with the Five Star Movement and the Nationalist League, all of whom blame the country's financial woes on the incompetence of the central bank. Gee, just like here in the United States. So they want their gold back, and they should get it back. Draghi should not be throwing up a roadblock. So we're going to take another commercial break here, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And they're running our monthly test of the tsunami incoming ballistic missile siren system. So you may hear that in the background a little bit. We're talking about the economic news, and over in Japan, they're actually having an issue with a population decline. And apparently it has been rather serious, whether it's just people not having new babies or people moving away, or obviously Fukushima's had an impact as well. But right now there is a record 8.46 million homes in Japan that are vacant, completely unoccupied. Good, let's send them our homeless people. By the way, somebody just sent me an article here saying that on its recent deployment to the Mideast, the F-35 apparently was sent with the wrong spare parts. A little bit of a supply chain whoopsie there. Okay, let's talk about immigration. The immigrants are still pouring into this country. Nothing is being done. Trump is out there tweeting like crazy. And he's getting ready to talk about war with Russia and China. But how can this nation ever repel a military invasion by a well-armed military like the Russians or the Chinese or even from South America if we can't repel an invasion by a ragtag, disheveled, unarmed mob of impoverished illegal migrants? It just doesn't make any sense at all. All right, let's grab a phone call here. Barry in Oklahoma, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Oh, he dropped. Fair enough. Over in Switzerland, according to newly released data, several migrant groups of different national origins have welfare dependency rates well above 50%, with over 80% of the Somalis in the country taking state handouts. Now, the data was gathered and released by both the Federal Statistical Office and the State Secretariat for Migration, and shows that the 4,000 or so Somalis in Switzerland are by far the most prone to being on government benefits, with 83.7% relying on state income. Other nationalities have rates over 50%. Eritreans are 54.7%, Angolans at 54%. It's just a huge, huge drain on the system. Over in Stockholm, Swedish anti-extremism SAR is allowing returning ISIS fighters re-entry to the country, describing them as caring citizens. And they're trying to tell Swedish residents, you've got nothing to fear from these ISIS fighters returning from the Middle East to live peaceful, crime-free lives in Sweden. That's going to be a tough sell here. Now, Christina Kiernan, Stockholm's anti-violent extremist coordinator, claimed jihadis who returned from Syria and Iraq were living orderly lives following a public outcry regarding the government's decision not to strip people who fought in radical Islamic terror organizations of their Swedish passports. So basically, the idea is they're returning from killing, beheading, blowing things up, improvised explosive devices, and we can just expect them to start baking bread and something like that. Over in Great Britain, Julian Assange has been sentenced to 50 weeks in jail for jumping bail. So he's not going to be back in the United States for another year, supposedly, unless Britain decides to just go ahead and extradite him in the middle of his jail sentence. But here's an interesting little article, and it came out of Medium.com. It's authored by Caitlin Johnstone, basically saying why Australians should fight to bring Assange home. And that's always been one of the very annoying questions ever since this whole situation began. Where was Australia during all the years that Assange was staying in the Ecuadorian embassy? And I understand that Assange went to the Ecuadorian embassy because the Russian embassy wouldn't have him. Wasn't there an Australian embassy in London? Why didn't he go there? And why hasn't Australia ever raised a diplomatic offensive, if you will, to get Assange back under their control? He's their sovereign citizen. They've dropped the ball. Okay, we got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And I'm looking at the Fox News feed about the uprising in Venezuela. And they're making a big point over the fact that it's an unarmed uprising because Venezuela banned private gun ownership back in 2012. Well, you know, all of a sudden, yes, the people should have arms. They should be able to stand up to an abusive government. And what I'm seeing here is it's not a big crowd. And they're kind of just standing there. Like somebody said, let's go down and we'll join the revolution. I say, oh, well, okay, there's nothing on TV. And they're basically just standing around. Getting on back to Julian Assange, I did confirm during the commercial break, there is an Australian consulate in London, and it sort of boggles the mind why Julian Assange did not go there. But there's this Australian activist, Somerset Bean, and he's launched a GoFundMe with the simple goal of circulating 1,000 giant posters throughout Australian cities in the lead up to the May 18th elections, calling for Assange to be brought home. And the posters are urging Australians to contact their representatives and put political pressure on them to stand up for one of the nation's best and brightest stars. So, but yeah, I find it very disturbing that the Australian government has never really made an issue about this stuff. Story coming on out of Investment Watch blog. If you are planning on traveling by air in the near future, apparently government searches of phones and laptops at the airports are rising. No idea what they're looking for. Copyrighted videos, something like that. But again, it's just a complete abandonment of our Fourth Amendment right to privacy. Actress Julia Roberts is now out there calling for gender-neutral schools. I'm sorry, bathrooms, rather. She wants gender-neutral school bathrooms. Like I said, the Democrats don't have anything to run on other than this kind of stuff. They're doomed. All right, as you've probably read in a lot of places, there's this hypersensitive offensiveness to being touched that is being sold all over the country. And it's reached the point now where companies are considering a ban on all physical contact in the workplace, including something simple like fist bumps or the shaking of hands. Don't shake hands. You can be fired for that, which probably will slow down the communicability of certain diseases, but it shows just how rigid our society is becoming. Other places in the world, of course, things are very different. Workplace flirtation, affection, it's not just tolerated, it's encouraged. It makes for a happy workplace. This country has become very, very strange here. Over in Chicago, Jussie Smollett may have been left off or had all his charges dropped against him for that fake hate crime, but he still has that civil lawsuit. Chicago officials have announced plans to file a civil lawsuit against Jussie Smollett for the cost of the investigation into his fake hate crime. Now, they gave him a week to pay roughly $130,000, which, given the money he makes on, or made, past tense, on Empire, he should have it. But according to high-profile Chicago area attorney Karen Conti, the city's lawsuit is the actor's worst nightmare. The evidence would likely be unsealed, and the case could drag on for years. We're going to get the facts that we haven't gotten this far. The city wants its pound of flesh. Well, I understand Karen is a lawyer, and she's out there to do the best that she can for her client. But I am just not going to be feeling sympathetic for Jussie Smollett. He did make the decision to fake this hate crime. That was his choice. And I agree, he shouldn't have been let off on all those charges. We have way, way too many fake hate crimes out there. Over in New Jersey, the incumbent Democrat mayor of Elmwood Park, New Jersey, has been charged with interfering with the secrecy of the election process. And the prosecutor's office announced the move Monday. In early April of 2019, the Bergen County Prosecutor's Office received a complaint against Cara Magna, the mayor of Elmwood Park, alleging that he interfered with the election process with regard to applications for vote by mail ballots in the 2017 mayoral election in Elmwood. They're all cheating. And again, that's someplace else where Donald Trump has dropped the ball. He was going to have an Elections Integrity Commission. It lasted, what, 2 months? That's gone. Now, Democratic 2020 hopeful Pete Buttigieg, I hope I'm saying that correctly, basically came on out saying that he supported some exceptions to the mandatory vaccines and said there could be personal or religious exemptions. And immediately, of course, Democrats got on him, pharmaceutical executives got on him, and he was forced to backtrack. And his spokesman came on out and said, Pete does support some exceptions, except during a public health emergency to prevent an outbreak. Boy, such a tense issue, these vaccines. All right, we're going to take a phone call now. Richard in California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I just had a question about the very first call of your show. So he was saying that the only reason that Trump wasn't indicted was because he was president. What page is he reading?
Yeah, I mean, the report, the portions of the report I read said they didn't find anything. That caller was a shill caller. I mean, the Democrats are out there trying to sell this idea that there's been a cover-up and that, Mueller was protecting Donald Trump so they can keep on pounding on him from now until 2020.
I agree completely. Can you do me a favor? Anytime someone makes a claim like that, ask them the page number because it's not true.
Yeah.
All right, that was it.
All right, well, thank you very much for that update. And I had not gotten the impression that there was a specific page number the first caller was referring to, but that's a good point. On what page in the report does it say that Trump was let off the hook because he's president?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'd hear about it. I have 3 lawyers in my family.
Yeah. Okay. Dinner around your dining table should be interesting.
Well, thank you for taking my call.
You're welcome. Okay. All right. We're going to let you go. Back to the campaigns again. Killibrand has a new ad out where she's playing beer pong. Up in Canada, they are having their problems with flooding just the same as we are here in the United States. And apparently 10,000 people have been evacuated, and the Ottawa mayor is warning the worst is yet to come. So they've deployed 400 troops to the city to help fight the massive flooding which has hit the east of the country. Boy, it's been a rough year. Of course, again, when you are going into a new ice age, winters have a lot more snow. When the spring melt happens, you have a lot more flood water. That's just exactly what's going on both in Canada and here in the United States. So the evacuation comes as Federal Public Safety Minister Ralph Goodale said the situation in Ontario was potentially worsening, while in Brunswick, around 9,200 residences and cottages remain flooded, along with 7,000 other properties. That is ugly. It's very nasty. Burger King is out with a new faux meat burger. It's called the Impossible Burger, and it uses a fake meat product produced by Impossible Foods. It's plant-based. It's a veggie burger. But apparently it is turning out to be a huge success, and Burger King is now concerned that demand for the Impossible Burgers is outstripping the supply. The company that makes the burgers is pledging to open their factory longer and employ more staff. So Burger King announced that they're going to be selling this plant-based burger, the Impossible Whopper, in all of its locations throughout the United States by the end of this year. But Impossible has reached out to distributors and restaurants to let them know an Impossible shortage is entirely possible. Demand is outpacing the company's manufacturing capabilities. Well, somebody messed up the spreadsheet on that one. But that's a good place to be in. Demand is greatly outstripping supply. But if they can't adapt, if they can't adjust, they could go out of business simply because they can't fulfill their contracts. Okay, I just got an email here from somebody saying that there appears to be more deterioration on the Oroville Dam. Now, this guy is talking about the webcams, but as of the last time I checked, the live webcams at the Oroville Dam are not working. It's just black streaming video here. And is that just maintenance, or is something going on they don't want people panicking about? Over at madnesshub.com, there's an article about the mismanagement of the Flint water crisis. Now, the Democrats love to pretend Trump is somehow to blame for the Flint, Michigan water mess, which they've been experiencing for years. Now, they had problems with their water before Trump even announced he was running. And don't forget, this is a Democratic stronghold. They've been running the city for decades. But forget all of that. It's somehow Donald Trump's fault. Oh, there go the sirens. And they're going on saying that Trump is deliberately ignoring the struggles of the people of Flint, Michigan. He's making sure they receive no support or help from the EPA because he's racist or something, blah, 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 blah. Well, it actually turns out Flint has received $100 million from the Environmental Protection Agency, and there is significant evidence that it is being misspent through corruption by local politicians. And the mayor's office has simply refused to talk to the only local paper for an entire year about what's going on. Boy, everybody's out there lying here. Speaking of the EPA, remember the other day Donald Trump, campaigned on vaccine safety, and just a few days ago was out there saying, yes, measles epidemic, get your measles vaccine. I am the president, you will do it. The Environmental Protection Agency said today that as far as they are concerned, the active ingredient in Bayer Monsanto's weed killer Roundup, glyphosate, is safe, ignoring a growing body of independent research showing a strong connection between glyphosate and cancer in humans. But we're the Environmental Protection Agency. And today's decision by Administrator Wheeler, like virtually everyone he and the Trump administration make, completely ignores science in favor of polluters like Bayer. And this move by the EPA should not come as a surprise. Under the control of Trump and Wheeler, the agency is virtually incapable of taking steps to protect people from dangerous chemicals like glyphosate. Well, we've been seeing that for a long time. And perhaps it's a good idea to go back and remember just how the Environmental Protection Agency came into being and what its real purpose is. And that goes all the way back to the Nixon years, when Nixon ended gold convertibility. It was called the Nixon Shock, and it basically shattered the confidence other countries had that the United States possessed the gold it claimed to have to collateralize borrowing. And so Nixon created the Environmental Protection Agency, and it was sold to you as, we're going to protect the environment. Its real job has been to go on out and take control of vast tracts of your public lands in order to lock them away so they can be pledged as collateral. And it uses a whole bunch of different programs to conceal the true size of the land theft: wilderness areas, roadless zones, wetlands, so forth and so on. But it's really about grabbing chunks of land with natural resources and holding them away from the American people and American business so the government can borrow against it. Good example of that would be the Grand Staircase Escalante Monument, which was declared a national monument, and it locked away a domestic source of low sulfur coal, forcing American companies to go do business with Asian coal suppliers who were campaign donors. And by the way, it actually also violated Utah's statehood agreement, because Utah's statehood agreement said the profit from that coal seam would be used to fund the school's education, the state's education system. And unfortunately, once the Grand Staircase Escalante Monument was declared, Utah had to become dependent on federal education funds, and with it, Common Core. So, alrighty. According to LifeSite News, we've seen this happen before, and it is terrible. Apparently, once again, Kenyan doctors have found anti-fertility chemicals in United Nations tetanus vaccines. More about this when we come back from our commercial break. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to go to the phone lines now to Jeff in Minnesota. Aloha, Jeff. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, number one, I'm from St. Paul, Minnesota, and number two, there's a local paper that comes out free to the racks, like on Wednesday. It's called City Pages, or citypages.com, and they've got a headline story about the Chilean mining company that bought the rights to mine copper and other metals up in the northern Minnesota, and the story of the billionaire owner that purchased the rights to this mine. And, you know, these guys, they never really get around to doing anything until finally it gets done. And in this case, the owner of the company bought a mansion in Washington, D.C. right after Trump got elected. And before he could get the license to rent out an apartment or rent a place out, he rented out to Ivanka Trump and her husband.
Okay.
So it talks about how the plan is to open up like mines and, staging areas and move the dirt around. And it's right up by the boundary waters. And chances are there's going to be problems because, life disappears in rivers once you have a spill for a while. And,
yeah.
So it's an interesting story. And so anyway, I haven't called in for a while, but I still listen. And
well, thank you very much for the phone call here, and we're going to let you go. Yeah, the problem with mining is that if you don't have somebody who's keeping watch, the mining operation can be very destructive of the environment and toxic downstream. Out in California, of course, is this town Coloma, which is celebrated as the place where the northern part of the gold rush began, Sutter's Mill area. And they still can't drink the water out of the ground because of all the mercury that was used to suck the gold out of the ground. When the panning didn't work, they started drilling down deep and using mercury to suck it all up. But I'm not surprised to hear about what's going on with this copper mine. You grease the right politicians' hands and they just look the other way. Remember when the Flint water crisis first broke out? What was the first thing the Flint government did? They got bottled water delivery for their offices. It's just insane. All right, getting on back to the story that we were talking about. Over in Africa, the Kenyan Catholic Doctors Association is saying that they took 6 different samples of the UN-provided tetanus vaccine from various locations around Kenya, was sent to an independent laboratory in South Africa for testing, and it was found to contain this antigen, HCG, which is used in anti-fertility vaccines. But it was found present in the tetanus vaccines targeted to young girls and women of childbearing age. All right, we got to take a break here for station identification. Come back with hour number 3 here, and could probably use a few more phone calls as well. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And let's get on back to our health and safety news here. Apparently, Ambien, which is a sleep medication, is now becoming infamous for prompting people to act bizarrely in a semi-sleeping stupor. And the FDA is going to require sleeping pill manufacturers to post warnings on labels. Apparently, Ambien is making people kill themselves while they're asleep. Good medication. Really good medication. And, I keep commenting on how the whole world seems to be getting more and more bizarre. We're seeing these stories about, this guy who beat this 4-month-old baby to death. All this nonsense about transgenderism. And I'm wondering how much of it is linked to this saturation of medications that we live in. And I know that there is a concerted effort to sort of conceal that kind of information. But how widespread is it really? Are we doping ourselves into bizarre behavior? We know that there's a problem with prescription antidepressants. Now they're telling us there's a problem with sleeping pills. Okay. Over at Tucker Carlson, they've had a little bit of a tiff with Babbel, who's one of the companies that advertise on the Tucker Carlson show. And Babbel is a language learning app. And they basically picked a fight with Tucker Carlson, and Fox News responded by blasting them as a minor advertiser, accusing them of teaming up with intolerant partisan activists. So the official Twitter account for Babbel publicly blasted Carlson's show and his fans as repugnant and at odds with our mission and values. If you saw our ad on Tucker Carlson's show, you're right to be upset. We are too. And Babbel said they're blacklisting the show. So basically getting around all of the talk here. What we're looking at is the company whose entire business model is based on improving speech for those learning new languages admits they're not big fans of free speech. And that's a very bad place to be in. Okay, if you thought winter had come and gone, think again. Over in Colorado, another blast of snow on that Front Range. Gosh darn that human-caused global warming. I think it should be obvious to everybody. The winters are getting longer. They have been. Spring comes later. The growing seasons are shorter. There's much more snow and therefore much more floodwater. The climate is changing and we had nothing to do with it. We human beings. It's the sun. It's a new Maunder minimum. So, ugly situation. Apparently, there was actually an attack, an airstrike on the largest Russian base in Syria. And the Russians are saying it was a drone belonging to rebel fighters, and it was shot down over the Russian air base. But apparently it was a heavy bombardment. Now, so far up until this point, the United States and Israel and Russia aren't shooting at each other. Israel claims to be shooting at Iran. But for somebody to be shooting at Russia, the Russian base in Syria, that could escalate things tremendously. Getting on back to the oil embargo, Saudi Arabia is saying that they're ready to go. They're ready to switch over. Of course, they've got their own oil. It's not like they needed to buy a lot from Iran. But over in India, they're telling the United States government there's no way they can replace the oil they import from Iran. They're saying it's flat out impossible. They are saying that they need to be allowed to import crude oil from Iran without being punished by Washington, D.C. So Iran is still exporting oil, probably not as much as they were yesterday. And the world is just turning away from this sanction-happy government here. Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif over in Iran is highlighting how the U.S. National Security Advisor Bolton is feverishly trying to push Washington towards war with Iran. And he says the world is catching on to Bolton's chronic warmongering. I think the world has caught on to the U.S. government's chronic warmongering years and years ago, especially after it came out that Saddam Hussein didn't have those nuclear weapons. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And apparently Maduro is still in power, at least according to Fox News. And Guaido is still calling on the troops to oust Maduro, but it doesn't look like he's getting many of them. The FAA has now prohibited U.S. air operators from flying below 26,000 feet over Venezuela. So let's see. Delivered a speech. Brazil is now confirming 25 Venezuelan military staff have now requested asylum. So that is going to get Very, very nasty. There was an incident where a Venezuelan military vehicle drove over a curb. Apparently protesters were throwing rocks at it, and it went into the crowd of protesters. Nobody knows if anybody got hurt, but CNN and BBC were just playing that tape over and over and over again. Oh, the evil Venezuelan military. And so Venezuela has now pulled them off the air. Okay. Pardon me. Let's see. Yeah, here's another story. Fox News, uprising turns violent after military armored vehicle plows into crowd of opposition supporters. Okay, we got a caller on the line. Let's go to Tom in Florida. Aloha, Tom. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, Michael. Good day. Yes, Michael. Remember yesterday I called you in and I told you about the Pope and Catholic Church financing this immigration? They had it on Matt Drudge. This has been going on over a year.
Yes.
That the Catholic Church and the Pope have been financing this caravans coming up here through Mexico. And I just wanted to bring that to your attention. And also, I was watching OAN, One American News Network, every hour on the hour. I was telling you, they have an immigration update. It currently now is almost $89 billion from what I'm seeing, and it's 26 million illegals according to their sources that are in this country illegally.
Yes.
And by the way, yes, Michael, and yesterday some guy, Darren or Derek, called you and said that I was saying about Cuba's not it was not rubble. Well, listen, I've been to Cuba 5 times, and if he wants me to explain Cuba in 1951, when my grandfather used to go over there from Dade County, he'd take a ferry down to Key West. Cuba was Vegas before there was Las Vegas.
Yes.
And they had Tropicana to Copacabana, and the Cubans would get TVs and cars before only other state that got in this country got TVs and cars before anybody else was California. So that guy, whoever he called you yesterday, saying I don't know what about a revolution or a revolution, I'm the one that coined the phrase revolution. It is a revolution because only 1 out of maybe 100 Cubans, not one woman on that island drives a car, and 1 out of 100 males have a car. So don't tell me that is not a revolution in that place, because I've seen the buildings. I've been there. There's not no street lights in the place, signal lights, except maybe when you go into a resort area. So don't tell me that I don't know how Cuba was. My grandpa used to play in the Copacabana, Tropicana back in the 50s, okay? He was in the band member, and he used to come from Dade County all the way down to Cuba, Havana, okay? So I know all about Cuba. I can tell you all about Cuba, anything you want to know about Cuba. Cuba was discovered by the Castilian Spanish, okay? And for a short time, England actually owned, England actually was flying the Union Jack in Havana, Cuba for like 3 years, okay? So I don't know if people know that England actually swapped Cuba for Florida. I don't know if people know that. But Cuba was definitely one of the places that Christopher Columbus did go when he went to the New Americas was Cuba, and he said it was one of the most beautiful places that he's ever seen in his travels.
Yes.
His name in Cuba was Christopher Colon. His name was Colon. So that guy that called you yesterday saying, oh, he don't know what he – well, I do know what I'm talking about. I can debate that guy anything he wants to debate about if he'd like to debate me. Anytime, any place, anytime. Now, like I said, Cuba is now before Castro did take over that island, it was a very rich place.
Yes.
It had everything before.
Well, no. Okay, because back when Batista was running the place, for the elites, they were very wealthy. They had interest in the hotels. They were connected with organized crime. But the reason Batista was supported by the United States is he was willing to sell Cuba's agricultural produce to American companies like United Fruit and PepsiCo at below market rates. And this drove the ordinary Cuban people deeply into poverty. And that was why Castro enjoyed the popular support of the people when he finally had the revolution. So, Did you know, Michael, in Cuba before we went to Hawaii and got the pineapples? You know where all the pineapples were coming in from the United States coming from? Cuba.
Cuba had better pineapples actually than Hawaii. The pineapples actually were a little bit sweeter according to what I was told. I never really tried a Cuban pineapple, but I was told that was the biggest place to get pineapples, definitely into the eastern United States, east of the Mississippi.
Well,
So
the reason for the difference in sweetness has to do with shipping times, because in order that the pineapples grown here in Hawaii not go bad while they're being sent to the west coast of America, they're harvested a little bit sooner, and so they're not as sweet. For local consumption here in the islands, they will grow what are called the sugarloaf pineapples, which are harvested at exactly the perfect time for maximum sweetness.
That is correct. And I don't know, yesterday the guy said, I don't know. Well, let me tell you, the sugar, most of the sugar up until like 1955, a good percentage of the sugar was grown in Cuba that was shipped to eastern United States.
Yes.
I don't know about west, but I know a lot of the sugar was coming from Cuba. If you've been to Cuba, you can see the soil looks a lot like in some areas, like the Georgia clay that they have in Georgia. You actually think you're in Georgia in some parts of Cuba. I can tell you that. It looks a lot like Georgia. Now, as far as the revolution with Castro, well, Cuba was doing just fine financially. Castro, what happened, Michael, is, and I'm sure you're aware of this. If you're not, I'll make this aware to you. A lot of people were coming in from Haiti and Jamaica back in the early 1910s and 1920s.
Yes.
Are you familiar with that?
Not really. I'm not that much of a student that far back.
Well, believe it or not, Haiti is very close to Cuba. It's
yes,
like
that part I knew.
Stretch, yes. And Jamaica is not that. I think Jamaica is like, I think it's 70, 80 miles. I can't remember the exact number there, but a lot of people in the early 19th to turn of the century from those areas were coming into Cuba. Because Cuba at one time was it had Indian population, of course. They were the natives of that island, the Hathaway. They call it Hathaway. They even actually have a beer called Hathaway beer. There's another group, I can't remember them right offhand. But Cuba is very interesting because the Spanish, when they were coming to the Americas, that was really one of their main stops, Cuba.
Yes.
That was one of their main dropping off points. So, Cuba has a lot of history, a lot of architectural, some great churches that they did back in the, in the late 1700s, 1800s. It's an amazing place in the geography of the place. But that guy was saying that, well, listen, Cuba was doing just fine until Castro came up into power. They were doing wonderful. However, a lot of people were illiterate in the 50s. So that's why Castro was able to manipulate that. Remember, Che Guevara, Michael, I know you know this. He was not a Cuban.
Yes, that I knew.
Around with these, in Cuba, they have Che everywhere. And I'm like, this guy, and if you know anything about Che Guevara, okay, he was not a Cuban. He's an Argentinian, and he was not a good person, okay?
Yes.
You look at his history. I'm not even going to say that on air. You can find that out, and you can discuss that with yourself. But Che Guevara was pretty wicked as far as he was able to do to that island, okay?
Yes.
Believe it or not, before Castro took power, Cuba actually had some very elite golf courses. And like you say, the well-to-do people would go over there from the United States or anywhere in the world, actually. It was like a paradise, as far as vacationing. Well, they had a lot of golf courses. And they had an article in the Golf Digest about 3 years ago that I read. It was very interesting. Raul Castro, Emilio Cienfuegos, Che Guevara, and two other officials were out there playing golf. I believe it was on the Havana golf course. And because Castro lost, he said, close all the courses down and tear them up and, and bulldoze them down. They only kept, I believe, one course open. And that was in Venezuela, maybe some other little course. Basically, because he lost a round at golf to Che Guevara, you can read that. It was in the Golf Digest. And I basically believe it. He tore the golf courses up in Cuba, which actually had like couple major nice courses over there. A lot of the old pros would go over and play with.
Well, I can understand where Castro would have had support for that. I mean, there are a lot of people. We're an island like Cuba, and it gets very crowded here. And there are a lot of people who are wondering, why does every single military base have to have its own private golf course? And there have been a lot of calls for these golf courses to be basically shut down and the land returned to the people of Hawaii. To give us a little bit more living room. And so I can understand where Castro may have been coming from on that one.
Michael, one more thing before you let me off there. I know you're going to get me. You had one caller that called in yesterday. He made a really great, interesting point yesterday to you after I called. I listened. He was talking about why are we worried about Venezuela when we really should be working to aim at Mexico? Why are we not sealing that border and taking 50 miles of off their border, off our border and their border, and just seal it off and put whatever we have to do to stop this immigration invasion? Why hasn't Donald Trump or any president in the last 20 years stopped this illegal invasion, Michael? Why? Why is this continuing?
That's an excellent question. And you know, we know that Eisenhower was able to stop the illegal immigrant problem. Hungary just demonstrated how well a fence can actually work. Yeah, they're being brought into this country for some reason, and I don't know why. Is it for more cheap labor? Is it because somebody thinks they can be turned into soldiers for the coming World War? But it is an absolute failure to secure our border. And that caller yesterday was absolutely right. Instead of mucking about in Venezuela, which is really all about the oil and the currency it's sold in, we should be taking care of this nation, and we're not. In fact, that seems to be kind of a situation with the government as a whole. They can't fix the problems here in the United States, so they're going to show how butch they are by going on out and mucking about with other people's countries.
You're right, Michael. Michael, what about John J. Pershing? Didn't John J. Pershing chase Pancho Villa into Mexico, way deep in Mexico, with Pershing and General Patton? I think Patton was part of that, wasn't he?
I don't recall that Patton was part of the situation with Pancho Villa. I'd
like to look into that. I thought I heard that Patton was actually, when he was a young man, he had to go fight against Pancho Villa. I think it was Patton or MacArthur, one of them. And John J. Pershing, I know, was the man who actually went in there with the mission of chasing down Pancho Villa. John J. Pershing, correct?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure that was who was in charge of it all. I don't know about Patton, but it'll be worth a hunt. But again, we're getting way back in history, and we need to sort of get brought up to the current moment. So Tom in Florida, we're going to let you go here. We're going to take another break for commercials. I could use a few more phone calls, 800-313-9443, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and I see we're starting to get some callers on the line. Before we get to them, though, a little bit of a whoopsie for NASA. It seems that over the last couple of years, they lost a couple of missions, like the Carbon Observer, during launch because of a failure of the nose cone. And it's now come on out that the company that was providing the aluminum for those nose cones, the aluminum extrusions, was falsifying its testing information. And the company has changed names, and they agreed to pay NASA $45 million, which hardly comes close to the $700 million that NASA lost on these missions. All right, let's start taking phone calls here. The White Rose in Colorado. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Good afternoon. I got just one word to say on the reason why they're letting all these folks up here. And that word starts with a C, and it's customers.
Okay, well, I understand where you're going.
You gotta have they more mouths to feed. You gotta spend money. You gotta go to the doctor. You gotta go to the grocery store. You gotta spend the money and go and spend money in all of our businesses that we own.
Here's the problem with that thinking. The illegal immigrants coming up here have no more money than ordinary legal American citizens. And we're already seeing the signs of recession set on in. And so I understand what you're saying, and certainly that could be the Pope's.
They don't care. They don't care how they get their money. It doesn't matter how they get their money, as long as they keep it moving.
Well, I think that's an issue for ordinary Americans as to where we can't get money.
Cash flow. Oh, you got to go on welfare to get money. You got to go food stamps. You got to go Section 8. You got to do this. You got to do that. You got to take the money from the cow.
Well, it's an interesting concept. I'm not sure, and it may in fact be a factor, but I still think it's all about changing the demographics of this country for the elections.
And it's just one of many reasons, I'm sure. Well, anyway, thanks for taking my call, and have a good day.
All right, thanks an awful lot, and we're going to switch over to Peter in California. Aloha, Peter. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, I'm sorry, I've never called in twice before, but I know quite a bit about this Pershing Pat Pancho Villa thing.
Yes.
And Pancho Villa attacked Columbus, New Mexico in 1915. Pershing was in charge of the Southern Department, military department. He went down. His wife had been, and most of his family, had been killed in a tragic fire at Presidio, San Francisco, about a year earlier.
Yep.
And he started dating Patton's wife, not Patton's wife, Patton's sister Nita. Nita
okay.
Pattons were very wealthy, and so Patton, who was a junior officer at the time, cavalryman, was brought along on the expedition as an aide to Pershing because of Nita. That's how he got to go to World War I as well in the first detachment. But he also had been a very wealthy family, by the way, money on both sides. But he had been an Olympic pentathlon finalist. He was an excellent pistol shot, swordsman, so on and so forth, rider.
Yep.
And he was hard to restrain as Pershing's aide, and so he kept going out on patrol. And on one of these patrols, which was done in an old car, he and a couple of soldiers ran into Pancho Villa's right-hand guy, and instead of a military engagement, it was almost like a gunfight in the Old West. And Patton drilled this guy, Olympic shooter that he was, brought him back strapped across the hood like a deer to Pershing, and Pershing loved him as basically as a guy who was a killer. That's what we're there for, after all. But anyway, that's what happened, and he was part of that. And Pershing also brought him along in the first contingent to go overseas in World War I.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good to know here. So, Peter, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. I'm looking at an article somebody just sent to me about Pancho Villa, General Pershing, and the U.S. Army truck. It actually fails to mention Patton by name. And so that can be a little confusing here. But this is coming from the Ultimate History Project. And history is a lot of fun, except we have to kill so many people making it. All right, getting on back to some of our other political news. Apparently there's been yet another situation over at this school where these 4 12-year-old girls were strip searched. What a brutal place we are becoming here. We talked about the California we're going to take a break for commercials anyway. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And going back and picking up some bits and pieces of news that we missed earlier in the day. Again, it's May Day, International Workers' Day. And of course, here in this country, they don't make a big deal about it because for my generation growing up, it was inextricably linked with the Soviet Union, which has a big parade every May Day. Big parade. And it's a major holiday for them. So apparently over in France, they were having their May Day celebrations. And apparently extremist demonstrators tried to intrude and basically confront the yellow vests, and it triggered a riot. That poor city, have they not suffered enough over there? Poor us, the human race, have we not suffered enough already? Carol Markowitz is out there with a comment saying about all these Democratic candidates out there saying, well, they're fine with a woman president. She's saying, okay, drop out. Makes sense. Representative Ilhan Omar, I think, is self-destructing before our eyes. She's out there saying, America is not going to be the country of white people. Well, Representative Omar, we're supposed to be a country that doesn't pay attention to things like skin color. And I would urge you to read the speeches of one Martin Luther King Jr. But Omar is out there basically fanning the racism and illustrating that's all the Democrats have to campaign on. Reparations, racism, global warming. Story coming out of Investment Watch blog here. Apparently, the effort at globalization of the economy is failing. And the U.S.-China trade deal won't solve that, according to experts. Well, the globalization process required a certain amount of, shall we say, cooperation and willingness to get along. And so it isn't that globalization is failing, it's being hacked to death by U.S. economic policy. And these other countries, they don't want to deal with us anymore. Apparently, last year, Subway closed more than 1,000 of their locations. And that's a shame because it was one of the healthier places you could get a quick meal. Apparently, the turmoil down in Venezuela is actually causing oil prices to drop. Apparently, the U.S. crude build outweighs the Venezuela turmoil. All right. Now, this is kind of interesting here. Apparently, over in give me a second. Yeah, this is New York. I thought it was New York here. Apparently, the city of New York is closing 2 Williamsburg yeshivas that allowed unvaccinated kids to attend class. Now, I know this is a hot button issue, mandatory vaccines or not. The problem here is that during Passover travel to Israel, a lot of people picked up measles and they're bringing it back with them. And yesterday there was this article where this rabbi came on out and said, well, the measles thing, it's going to lead to anti-Semitism. They're going to blame us. But it was a problem. And they're claiming a medical/religious exemption. Bill de Blasio is pushing the mandatory vaccines. It's coming to loggerheads. And so it's going to get very, very tense. And I'm sure that we're going to see Israel supporters screaming that it's discriminatory, that it's anti-Semitism, blah, 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 blah. Over in British Columbia, the authorities are threatening to arrest a father if he dares refer to his trans child as her real sex. In other words, she was born a girl. She wants to be a guy, or thinks she wants to be a guy. Somebody convinced her she wants to be a guy. And if the father dares call her she or her, he's going to get arrested? That is a little bit out there. And again, what bothers me about this whole transgender situation is not that there aren't transgender people out there. It's that it's being marketed. It's being promoted. It is being sold to the next generation as a fashion statement. And there are other people out there researching this who are saying, yeah, there are groups that are literally going into the schools and trying to tell kids, you want this. You want to be the other gender. You want to be fluid. You know, you don't want to be just what you were born as, that you have a right to be a different gender. And in this case, a lot of this does go back to what the caller was saying about the possibility of immigration. It's about customers. They're creating customers for a machine that hormone treats and then chops up little kids. That's what it's all about. I think I mentioned yesterday that Russia Today put out a documentary about people who've gone through this whole process of hormone treatments and surgery, and they come out the other side. They're unhappy. Their problems haven't been solved. They want their original sex back. And I imagine that's going to be virtually impossible. So, yeah, it's all about churning more money out of the general population. That's what it's about here. Okay, one of the teenagers from Covington Catholic School, remember that confrontation in front of the Lincoln Memorial where this Native American activist got into the face of these kids and just started pounding his drum, trying to provoke a reaction, which he did not get. And the media went ballistic. Oh, these Catholic white kids, they were being abusive, they were being racist, and it turned out, again, to be a load of nonsense. But one of the teens, Nick Sandman, is now suing NBC for $275 million, and I hope he gets every single penny of it. So basically, he's suing NBC Universal over its coverage, accusing the network of creating a false narrative driven by the anti-Trump agenda, which is true. Now, this is the third lawsuit filed by the Sandman attorneys against major media outlets, and it alleges NBC targeted the Covington Catholic High School student in its reporting on his January 18th encounter with Native American activist Nathan Phillips at the Lincoln Memorial. So, according to the Washington Times, the suit states that NBC Universal was motivated by its anti-Trump agenda, which we all know they definitely have. So, I hope he cleans them out. I hope he winds up owning the network, and if he does, hire me. All right. Now that's kind of a little bit silly again. More snow in Minnesota. Still snowing up there. Okay. Another email here regarding Tom about Cuba, what it was like in the 50s. But maybe he could take into account that the citizens of Cuba, the poorer ones, got bloody sick of being forced to take part in the donkey shows. You probably know what that is from context. And the pure corruption caused by the mafia's control of the country. The average citizen did not have much to say in how he was going to make a living. The people were horribly taken advantage of. The fruit companies and the mafia criminals have never forgiven Cuba for kicking them out, and Castro would never have risen to power if Cuba was doing just fine. That's true. That's true. If the people of Cuba had been happy at that time, wouldn't have been an issue. The letter goes on to conclude that Tom shows certain signs of racism. He tries to hide it, but it's thinly veiled. Okay. New York Times apologized, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so let's look at what's going on. They're back to investigating the investigators. And Fox News is back on this, where it's not really investigating the investigators. I mean, Mazie Hirono made that very, very clear. They're trying to retroactively rewrite the Mueller report to include at least one thing in there that they can hang an impeachment on. Why are they even trying? Trump is giving the deep state everything that they want. He's shown he's not a threat to the New World Order or the globalists or the financial system. Why so much hatred against him? Just because he broke the mold? That he was not the chosen one? the Democrats managed to lose one of the most heavily rigged elections in history. And now they've managed to botch up one of the most heavily rigged investigations in history. Okay, we're going to take another phone call. Mabel in Texas. Aloha. Mabel, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. I have a personal vaccine story.
Good.
Hopefully it's not going to be a disastrous one. And about the power of advertising in vaccines. When our little grandson was born, we were told by son and daughter-in-law that in order to hold him or be by him, we needed to get mumps and what was the whooping cough vaccine. I think it's a three-prong vaccine.
Yeah.
So I am opposed to getting vaccines, but in order to hold him or be even near him, we were forced to get it. So when I called under protest, when I called the doctor's office, I got a very interesting comment from the receptionist who said, wow, we've never gotten calls about this until they had that commercial on TV with the big bad wolf and whooping cough. So I thought, well, there, for all your listeners, shows the power of advertising and how I think that we should stop all these advertising about, oh, you need this drug or you need that.
Oh, I agree.
Because it obviously...
I agree.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah,
the United
obviously...
most countries do not allow advertising prescription medications on in their media. The U.S. is one of only 3 countries that does, and they spend a huge amount of money.
Tobacco.
Say again?
We stopped the advertising of tobacco on TV.
Yes, we did.
I mean, this is ridiculous. This is harming more people, and but I just wanted to relay my story about not wanting to get it, and it was kind of like forced on me. And I'm not usually the type of person. I mean, when they tell me to get a flu shot, I say no. And when I went to the one doctor, he said, "Oh, well, you're over 65. I'm actually 71." He said, "Well, you need your flu shot." And I said to him, "Well, I don't want a flu shot." And he looked at me and he said, "Oh, you're one of those."
Yeah.
So that was the last time I saw that particular doctor. So that's all I have to say, Michael. And I love your show, and I will hang up now. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. And getting on back to... Bye-bye. Okay. It is, again, it's pushing product. We have seen all these stories about how the vaccines, in many cases, simply don't work. In some cases, they're very harmful, in particular, like Gardasil. But it's all about making the money. And I'm sure that all of our politicians have got stock in the pharmaceutical companies in their portfolios. And so their decisions are going to be influenced by their wallets. And I think when we talk about the blueprint for the new America, we know that the president is supposed to have a blind trust. So he doesn't know where his money is, and it won't influence his decisions. In the case of the Clintons, we know they kind of fudged on that, and that's why Vince Foster got killed. In the case of Donald Trump, his money is under the control of his immediate family, but he can see clearly what it is that they're doing with it. But I think a blind trust is a really good idea, not just for the president, but for every single member of Congress, so they don't let personal financial interest sway their votes. I mean, we saw that back in 2008 with TARP, the Troubled Asset Relief Program. And they voted it through not to save the American people, but to save their own stocks, their own stock portfolio. They were voting themselves a safety net at your expense. But again, I would see it as the most fundamental of personal rights to decide what does and does not go into your body. Now, I understand the argument that's out there. If there was an outbreak of some major pandemic, if Ebola was loose in the country, would you get the Ebola shot? Okay, ask me when Ebola is loose in this country, because we have been hearing these dire doomsday warnings about a coming pandemic coupled with a demand that we buy vaccines for decades, and it hasn't happened. Back in 2009, they were doing this when the pig's fly flu was a flu that had human, porcine, and avian DNA in it, and they said, "Oh, it's going to be a disaster. It's going to be terrible," and it turned out to be less severe than the ordinary seasonal flu. And now we're finding out that the ordinary seasonal flu, in many cases, isn't even flu itself. It's called a flu-like illness, which is why the flu shots don't really work. But they're going to go on selling them. They are definitely going to go on selling them, because it makes money, and that's what it's really all about. Okay, we got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, final segment of our program today. And looking back at what's going on in Venezuela, apparently Representative Ilhan Omar is saying that the U.S. government kind of bears some of the blame for what's going on down there, which is accurate, but is not going to win her any more friends on Capitol Hill. According to foreignpolicy.com, Juan Guaido's plan for Venezuela appears to be in limbo. In other words, he doesn't really have one. He's just going to seize power, and then after that, I'm sure he'll be told what to do by somebody. Boston.com is saying that U.S. hopes for Venezuela change fizzle for the third time this year. And somebody sent me, forwarded to me a copy of an email that was sent out by the White House titled, "This is the corrupt, illegitimate Maduro regime." And it's just this shameful piece of propaganda, completely one-sided. And it quotes Mike Pence, who apparently for some reason is aboard the USS Harry S. Truman, saying, "As we stand here today aboard this ship, the people of Venezuela are seeking to reclaim freedom and democracy in their nation." Well, I understand that. We're trying to do that here. "A nation impoverished by dictatorship, socialism, and oppression." And so we say to President Juan Guaido, to all the freedom-loving people of Venezuela, "Estamos con ustedes," which means we are with you. Again, pure propaganda. This has got nothing to do with the people of Venezuela. And if you doubt that, just look at what has happened in every country where the U.S. has done a regime change. Every single one. There is no democracy. It devolves into a dictatorship. And the quality of life for the people goes downhill. Happened in Chile in 1973, happened in Iran in 1953, happened out in the Philippines. That's the pattern. None of this has anything to do with making life better for the people of the country. It's about grabbing the riches, grabbing the wealth. Just grab the goodies, grab the oil. Control what currency the oil is sold for. So apparently Guaido's attempt to stir the military failed miserably, and now there are rival protests in Caracas. It's a mess. They've just made a huge, huge mess. Reuters is saying that the Venezuela crisis puts Trump policy to the test. Meanwhile, over at the Washington Examiner, they're saying the U.S. military is prepping for a Guaido takeover in Venezuela. And again, we need to know where those two carrier groups, the Eisenhower and the Roosevelt, where are they actually going? So, and again, the Trump administration is telling Russia, get out of our hemisphere. That's the Monroe Doctrine, which, of course, Russia has never agreed to. So we're coming up here on the end of the program, and somebody is sending me these stories from Great Britain about the new war on knives. Britain wants to ban knives. Banning guns did not make crime go down, so we're going to ban the knives. Okay, there should be music happening right about now. Oh, there it is. It's just very low volume. Hang on a second. There we go. Okay, so stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of interesting things to share with you. Take what you learn here, share it with everybody that you know. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.
It happens more often than we can imagine.